Welcome to Shorty SuperCoach, and it's preview time. Now, we did a series of these last year. Now, they're not necessarily your obvious picks or your draftees and things like that, but just some guys at this point in time, early December, that you should have on your radar, worth discussing. Some old favourites, guys who could be worth a punt, well priced, coming back from injury, etc. But I will try to avoid, the obvious, because everyone knows, your Pendleburys, etc. And some draftees like McGrath and whatnot I will discuss, but largely we'll talk about draftees as pre-season gets going and the year gets closer. So we'll kick it off with the Adelaide Crows, and we'll start with perhaps SuperCoach's equivalent to Sai with Gangnam Style, a bit of a one-hit wonder with Brodie Smith. Now, to be fair to Sai, I think his YouTube numbers and money he made off Gangnam Style might represent a little bit more than Brodie Smith's 93.5 in 2014, but nonetheless, he is a bit of a one-hit wonder. Since then, he's only produced averages of 77 and 75.4. So every year I think we look at him and go, gee, look at that kick. He's a beautiful use off the half back line, capable of a goal outside 50. But when you really weigh up the numbers, I don't think he's worth it. Now, he'll probably be priced around that 407,000 mark. I'm doing these prices off Fan Footy. That's the team sort of tracker that I use. He's about 25 years old when the season rolls around, and look, he's basically coming into his prime, but I don't think we can trust him. Looking at his numbers, I think he's just way too easily tagged. Last year I only delivered 2 tons, which were 107 in round 3, 108 in round 10. It was few and far between for Brody. Certainly burst onto the scene in 2014 and was great that year, but I think sides have worked him out, and other players in the Adelaide lineup have probably taken over that role as the real user and runner off the half-back line. He's still very valuable, but I don't think he's the guy we sort of want in our SuperCoach side. He's too easily shut down. I think when you see a guy who's averaged really well one year and you're wondering, well, why can't he get back to that? That's always the discussion. Just looking at Brodie's numbers, pure numbers, we know that he is a little susceptible to a defensive tag, but when you look at last year compared to that 2014, he's only dropped off by 2 touches per game, and he's still averaging 13 kicks each. So for a guy who gets a lot of points off his effective foot skills, he hasn't lost much there, which begs the question, why. I think he's averaging an extra clanger per game. It's only 1 per game, but that adds up, 20-odd clangers extra for the year, and we know how much your points you lose for that. And he's going at 5% less disposal efficiency. So just little things, but I feel as if that we would doubt that he's going to get back to that real top form. And I certainly think there's better options around. We'll move on to Sam Jacobs. Now, another guy who's been a bit of a roller coaster. He'll be priced around 478,000. Of course, the Crows' main ruckman averaged just 86.8 last year. So not a great return there. He's shown that he can be a great scorer at times. I'll just read out his averages from 2012. 102.1, 85.3, plummeting back down, then he was right back up, 115.4, 108, and then he ducked back down to that 86.8 last year. So it is very difficult, because when you look at him, he does all the workload, gets enough of the ball, reasonably nice tap ruckman, but again, I feel as if he's probably not the guy we want on our side. He may be looked at, you might be looking at him and go, oh, Jacobs, look at that, capable of 115, even 108 I'll take. And I just don't think he's probably worth the gamble. I feel as if that there's probably too many chinks in his armour that as far as a SuperCoach perspective comes at, there's much better options. Of course, I'll talk about them throughout the pre-season, the likes of Goldstein and Gawn. And I don't think Jacobs is your man, but worth discussing because he has shown the ability to score some really good numbers. 2 blokes I wasn't a fan of there, but here's one I am a massive fan of, and Rory Laird. He's right in the thick of my penciled-in draft side at the moment. He will probably be fairly dear at this stage. 527,000, I think you'll find him, and I feel like it's worth it though. Last year he really showed that his 93.8 in 2015 was no fluke. I think he averaged around 98, I think it was. So definitely shown the ability to win plenty of the ball. I think, I haven't written it down actually, which is surprising, but I'm pretty sure he averaged around that 96 to 98 mark. And look, he's a hard runner, he's courageous, accumulates the pill. He got 20 touches in every game he played last year, including 25 plus in 13 of those games. And he even showed he was capable of racking up the big numbers. He got 35, around the 35-36 mark on 3 occasions. So for a defender, they are relatively unheard numbers. Now, when you hear those numbers, you go, hey, Shorty, why didn't he get to the 100 mark? Well, he doesn't win a lot of the contested ball. You'll find that he is running off loose a lot of the time, gets a bit of intercept pill, is a good user of it. I mean, he had the second most amount of effective disposals per game last year. He did suffer a bit of a foot injury, I think, midway through the season. I think it kept him out for about round 7 to 10. So there is real upside with Rory Laird, I think. I mean, he's a pure defender, so a bloke that I really think we can lock in with serious confidence. I think he's consistent. I mean, that's what I like. As a defender, I think there's no real threat of him being shut down, because he does have the ability to read the play really well, come off his man, and the Crows like to get the ball into his hand. And he just has a happy knack of, just finding the ball. He's a really good user of it, and, a bloke who just seems to pop up, as, some players just have that happy knack. And I think definitely with that foot injury, which, would have interrupted his season a little bit, still produced good numbers. I think there's real upside for him and a real chance to be one of the top defenders in 2017. Rory Sloane is the next man. And I think, it's very interesting, Rory. He's probably just below your elite as far as SuperCoach points. I think as a player, you'd probably put him in the elite category. I mean, he's a match winner, your heart and soul sort of player. When the game's on the line to be won, he's generally thereabouts for the Crows. But as far as SuperCoach goes, I mean, the loss of Dangerfield last year, it didn't hurt him too much. I mean, he had a very good average of 108.6. I still am slightly concerned about Adelaide's midfield. It's definitely their weaker point, and I'm not sure how much help he can get. He's obviously going to be a fairly unique sort of player. His averages from 2012, 106.1, 107, 114.8 was his big year in 2014, 105.5, and then rounding out last year. So, he's probably working into his prime. He's not a big user of the ball, or big gatherer, I should say, just the 25.2 touches, but he makes up with it with all his tackles, 7 per game. And he was top 10 in contested ball, I think. So, he's probably not getting a stack of support, but if we can see real improvement as far as hard and mid bodies go from the Crouch brothers, Thompson, he's getting a bit older, but Cam Ellis-Yeoman, Douglas is always thereabouts. It isn't a deep midfield. I mean, I reckon he's worth a punt. I mean, if you want to go different, he's certainly capable of going around 110, and I suppose worst case scenario, he might give you 108 like he did last year. So I just can sometimes get a little concerned when a team's midfield is a bit reliant on one player, because you just never know if they have a bit of a poor season and the workload just gets enormous for him. So I'd be looking to see if he can get a little bit more help, but nonetheless, he's shown that he doesn't need too much help winning his own ball and tackling hard. He's very consistent, and he could do a lot worse. I mean, he's probably not in my top handful or so of real elite mid-premiums I'm looking at, but he's certainly a guy that if you want to go different and you're a Rory fan, which there are many of, you consider. Now, I'm going to end with a couple of guys who didn't play last year, but should be considered certainly at their price and thought about. I'll start with Dean Gore, a former Cat, so I've seen him play a fair bit in the VFL. He's your hard inside mid, and I guess rolling off from what we're talking about Rory Sloane, there's probably a position there for him in that midfield. Not a definite position, but if he has a good pre-season, he's certainly a chance. Played 21 games in the SANFL last year, named in the best on 7 occasions. Look, he's yet to debut, so he's going to be priced at whatever that sort of 123 mark is, generally around there. 183 centimetres, 86 kilos. I think he's pretty much ready for AFL footy. He's the sort of guy that you look at and go, well, now's his time. Over the next year or so, he's made the switch of clubs. It's probably time that he can make his way in the AFL world. Whether he will or not, we'll wait and see. He's probably not going to be at the pointy end of mid-rookies that we're looking at, but as I say, that's why I don't discuss him too thoroughly yet, because Dean Gore's 2017 future will be really dependent on what he does over the pre-season, so we'll see how he goes. Troy Menzel is another guy, also made the switch of clubs not long ago from Carlton to the Crows, and it certainly hasn't worked so far. I mean, we watched as his trade partner was Kerridge last year, obviously the Crows dealing with him there for that trade to get a hold of Menzel, and he was a real popular selection for our Supercoach sides last year. Can Menzel do the same this time around? Not too sure. I mean, like Gore, now's his time. He's going to have to battle his way into a very impressive Crows forward line. I mean, of course, you got Betts there as far as a small forward, but they like to play relatively tall with Walker, Jenkins, Lynch. You know, it's quite a dynamic forward line. Now, he's going to have to be hard-pressed to get in there. Talk of him potentially trying to be a midfielder down the track. He's a bit like your, poor man's Chad Wingard at the moment. Sort of that same sort of role. Similar haircut now that I think about it. But anyway, they said he wasn't fit enough last year for the midfield. Not sure if that's the same. Last year, he played, 16 sample games, 21 goals, only 3 times named the best. But if you're looking at one of those games that you really want to take away from and say this is potential, was the elimination final. He was one of their best, 21 touches, 6 tackles, 4 clearances, kicked 3 goals, 4. So I guess that's an example of what he can do. Of course, that's at sample level, massive jump to AFL, but he'll be priced pretty well. I'm not exactly sure where he'll be priced. Now, he averaged 48.3 in 2015, then didn't play a game last year. So I can only presume that it's in the low hundreds. Could be basement, I'm not too sure. Not all those prices are finalised, at least on what I'm looking at. So I'd definitely be priced, you'd think, around that below 160 mark, I would say. So he's a bit of a tempter. I wouldn't think I'd be tempted unless he really convinced me over pre-season. He's a little bit flashy. I'm not sure if he's the sort of guy who will cement a spot at this point in time. But I think that's the whole point of these previews. He's worth discussing. He's worth thinking about. Put him on your radar. Watch him. I'm not saying he's definitely a good pick, but at this point in time, we've still got a few months to go. It's definitely worth having a few guys on your radar and worth discussing. But that's all I got for the Crows. So thanks for tuning in, guys. Much appreciated. Kicking off what will be a good pre-season, hopefully Supercoach-wise. We've got plenty of clubs to go through. I'll get stuck into Brisbane next. But as always, thanks for returning. Hopefully, if you were tuning in last year, hopefully you're back. And if you're a newbie, welcome on board. Hopefully you can check out all my previews. Feel free to check out stuff from last year to get an idea of what I'm about. Subscribe, give it a like. Always keen to hear a comment as well. That's when everyone likes talking in Supercoach is pre-season. There's plenty to discuss and plenty of options. So all the best with your pre-season Supercoach. Get along to Supercoach HQ as well. This will, of course, feature on that at some point in time. But yeah, subscribe to my channel. Get involved with the Supercoach HQ, boys. And I'll see you soon.